From the deepest, darkest recesses of Dangerous Nerds headquarters, Keith Moncrief and Gerry Kissel.
Hey guys, welcome to another episode of Pop Culture Minefield. This is Keith over here, and of course I'm Gerry, and we're doing something special. This is a very special episode because we have done an early launch of our interview portion of doing the series. And our first guest, thanks to Mikey Sutton, is none other than the amazing Kevin VanHook.
Yay!
Hey guys.
What's up, Kevin? Hey, yo!
How you doing?
So now, go ahead.
No, go ahead. No, you go ahead. Blackman first.
Well, now, Kevin, you are known as the co-creator of Bloodshot, which is now become this movie. First and foremost, as someone that has created or co-created a comic book character, how does it feel to actually see that character come to life and be brought to life by someone like Vin Diesel?
Oh, it's very cool. I mean, there's no denying it that, here's a comic book that Don Perlin and Bob Layton and I worked on 27 and a half years ago. And, which is over half my life. So I was like 26 when I wrote it. And to see it, go through this journey, all this time has been pretty cool. So, I mean, we've seen it evolve. There have been revamps, reboots, and all these different kind of takes on the character. And, with interest years ago, 20 years ago, there was going to be a movie starring Triple H.
Wow.
And I'm drawing a blank on the guy's name. There was a writer who did, I think it was called 100 Bullets, but he was going to do a version of the screenplay, and comic book guy as well. But
wow.
So there was a lot of interest over the years. Bloodshot was always one of the more cinematic ideas we had. Obviously, a lot of the characters, the Valiant characters, could make that jump and be really neat. It'd be very cool to see a modern take on Exo and variety of them. Eternal Warrior was always something very close to me that I also wrote. But it's great, and it's been great to be involved. Dinesh Shamdasani, who ended up buying the rights out of bankruptcy from Acclaim years ago, and working with people like Jason Kothari, and then he brought in other investors, and Fred Pierce, who's one of our original Valiant guys. It's very cool for Dinesh to actively try to keep me and Bob and Don involved with the project. And I actually got to go on set last year in South Africa with Bob. And so it's a pretty great experience.
Now, you had made reference to the fact that many of the characters through Valiant had a kind of cinematic flavor. Are you saying that that's really the angle that everyone there took, or is it just sort of a happenstance that you had a lot of people that were working in the comic that were all big film fans?
I think it's the latter. I think it's also the fact that Valiant took the approach, starting with Shooter and Bob and Barry, that we were not trying to just regurgitate what Marvel and DC did, but actually kind of create a cohesive universe of characters that reflected reality. So our characters, our continuity was very important to us. So we did things like time date captions. If we said this story took place October 17th of 1992 and Bloodshot's in London, we wouldn't have another episode where he should be in New York that same day or something like that. We would take advantage of that. And so if we had a character walking down a hallway at MI6 underneath Heathrow Airport with his arm in a sling, Bloodshot passing Ninjak, in the other guy's book that came out that month, we would see the scene from the other point of view. So we would do things to kind of tie that continuity together. And that realism, I think, is why I feel it lends itself to cinematic adaptation.
I think, from personal experience, when I'm planning out my panels for a comic, I tend to think cinematically with all my blocking. And you were both a writer and an artist. So I'm assuming you approach the same way.
Well, and also today I'm a filmmaker, so I write and direct.
Yeah.
So it was always something that was an aspect of it. I started off drawing comics. So I actually started drawing when I was 17 professionally and did stuff for Pacific Comics, and then Pacific folded, and I did stuff for Eclipse, and they kind of folded. And so I was kind of a typhoid Mary there for a little bit, where everybody I was working for went out of business. And,
yeah, that happened to me in the 80s too. And I decided I'm done with comics, and I just became an illustrator for magazines.
Well, I didn't change. I did do other things because I had other interests, but I did illustration. I drew for Highlights for Children magazine. I did hidden.
Oh, nice.
I did phonics illustration. I did very little bit, but a little bit of technical illustration for things like RCA, VCRs, and that sort of thing. But I was a graphic artist, and so I did paste up and design and that kind of stuff. And then all the while, periodically jumping back in and out of comics. And then in '86, I created my Jack Frost character, which became a series with Amazing Comics, and then reprinted in a new couple of series through Caliber Press. I was their art director for innovation and production manager and art director for Caliber. And then first real prominent success, I guess, was Rocky Horror Picture Show. I wrote and drew the adaptation for that in 1990. And,
yeah, I was reading about that. Yeah.
And then in '92, went to Valiant and started off as a production manager, and it was literally a case of being in the right place at the right time, and opportunity meeting preparedness. And I made it clear that I wasn't trying to just write and draw for them. I was looking to do what they hired me to do, which is to be their production manager. And I had a strong background in printing and pre-press, and which at that time desktop publishing was still in its infancy. And because I had been a computer geek since 1984, that's what I was into. I was aware of all this stuff. And we did a lot of very early things. I designed one of the first digital fonts. We actually hired one of our letterers to create a digital font. We started lettering our comics in 92, 93.
Wow.
And it inspired because of an airline ad for create your own signature font. And I'm like, well, if we could do a signature, we could do the whole alphabet. And so I contacted them, and we actually designed Kenny Lopez and a guy named Joe Albello. We paid them a fee and a royalty. So it was great. Kenny was very fast anyway, but he went on to be an art director at DC and designed countless logos for comic books, including the original Bloodshot logo. But Joe was a workman-like fellow who he wasn't terribly fast. And so he was a 2-page-a-day guy, and as a letterer, you can't make any money that way. And but suddenly we could have somebody letter, 10 or 15 pages in a day and pay him a few bucks for each one as a royalty, and he didn't have to lift a finger after he designed the font. So it was a good thing. It worked out well for everybody. But yeah, Valiant was a great opportunity. I got there. Jim Shooter and I had about 3 months of overlap. Barry Windsor Smith and I worked together for about 6 or 7 months. And I ended up being the executive editor and vice president, and wrote, I think we counted recently, something like 118 comics for them. And so it was a good ride.
Well, that leads me to ask, when you were growing up, what comics did you start out with? Who was your favorite? Which company did you prefer? All the standard questions. And then really your comic of choice.
I was a dyed-in-the-wool Marvel fan, so I didn't care for DC books at all, and so I didn't read them. I had picked up a couple when I was about 8, and I happened to pick up one that was really super cool, which turned out to be the Swamp Thing starring Batman by Bernie Wrightson and Lynn Wein.
Oh, I had that and got Bernie to sign it for me.
Oh, very cool. I'd gotten rid of it long before I met Bernie. Bernie and I ended up being good friends, and sadly he's passed away. But I was not only friends with him, but friends with his first wife and with his son John. Still friends with John. His first wife passed away as well. But I thought that's what all DC books were going to be like, and they weren't. And I didn't like them as much. And a buddy of my brother's ended up lending my brother about a year's worth of Fantastic Four. And I got hooked. And this was a run probably from around like 165 to 177, something like that of the FF. So it was Rich Buckler, George Perez, Marvin Lynn writing, Joe Sinnott inks. And then when I started buying them officially myself was about a year later. And I started with FF 186, which was the Salem 7 issue. And I stuck with it. And then I was living in rural Indiana, southern Indiana, and my folks were from Kentucky, and I lived mostly in Indiana and Kentucky at that time. And we moved to Detroit, and suddenly I had access to comic book stores. And even though I was 12 or 13 years old, it's a different time, and I could take the bus, city bus, change 2 buses, go all the way across Detroit by myself, or with a buddy, and go hit Comic Kingdom and buy books. And I pretty much bought relatively speaking, my dad and mom were doing pretty well then as far as stable work. And so I had a $10 a week allowance, which was a big deal. And I'd never had an allowance until that time. And so that bought me a whole bunch of comic books and some McDonald's and a drink and bus fare. And I had a big time. But I even I convinced Edna, the lady that ran Comic Kingdom, to let me buy Spider-Man #1 at $40 down and $10 a week. It was $110. And
wow.
They sold it years ago to pay for some utility bills that my folks were short on. But it was a great thing. It was just a fun thing to be able to do and to be able to say. But I had a choice between X-Men 2, I think is what it was, and then or Spider-Man 1. I wanted Spider-Man 1. But big reader. Because of that, English teacher ended up taking me to a Simon & Schuster book sale, and I got Origins and Son of Origins, Marvel comics by Stan, and got hooked on all that stuff. So absorbed it. Bought the Overstreet Price Guide and just memorized stuff about EC Comics. That was the volume that came out that particular time. And so I was just, wow, there are these really cool books that are like 30 years ago, and they're so cool.
Yeah. I mean, did you ever get a chance to meet some of the people that you had idolized reading their work?
I've met almost everybody I ever idolized. Really, in all.
And it's Kevin, was that like weird for you, like it is for me, to not just get to meet them, but to work with them is really weird.
I really honestly wouldn't say that as much. Might say cool, might say neat, but it was Barry Windsor-Smith and I ended up sharing an office, like a small 10 by 12 foot room for several weeks. That was cool. And Barry was very encouraging and very sweet, and obviously a genius and very talented. And I think he got a kick out of the fact that I didn't let it overwhelm me that I was working the presence of Barry Windsor-Smith. So like one time, because I was editing him too, so I was editing Archer and Armstrong, and one day he looked at a page and said, well, the problem I have here is in this penultimate panel. And I said, what? And
Penultimate.
Next to last. And I'm like, well, why didn't you just say next to last? And he was kind of like, Kevin, you're so incorrigible. And that was, our relationship. That kind of summed it up. Like when Bloodshot 1 came out and we're all signing, so it's everybody associated with the book. We're signing maybe 30 or 40 copies for some reason. And Barry's signature was a series of humps. And he was right before me. And I said, Barry, hey, I think you messed up. There's supposed to be 7 humps in Barry and 5 in Windsor. And he was like, confused, but got a kick. He put up with me.
Wow.
But yeah, I got to meet George Perez, and Marv Wolfman and I are friends, and Len Wein and I were friends.
What do you think of this recent news with Dan Didio?
Well, Dan and I are friends. I haven't spoken to him directly since, but I posted a little thing on Facebook about the fact that how much I care for his friendship, and I wish him well. He about a dozen years ago or so, I decided I wanted to write and maybe draw some comics again. And Jimmy Palmiotti introduced me to Dan. And we started talking, and I was concerned that, he's not going to know who the hell I am. And so I started talking, and I said, so I used to write and draw a character called Bloodshot. And he's like, no, Kevin, I know who Bloodshot is. I read the book. I know all about that stuff. And I said, well, in these days, I write and direct movies. He said, yeah, and when you cut that chick in half in Death Row, that was fucking awesome. Okay, well, at this point, anything else I'm going to say is going to just screw this up. So I'm just going to shut up and let him talk. And we ended up working together. He asked me what I wanted to do, and I said I'm open. And he said he wanted me to do something horror related because most of my present day stuff was horror related, and in film. And then he said, what about you? I said, well, I was kind of hoping. I mean, in my dream world, I'd love to do something with the big guns like Superman or Batman. He said, well, why don't you do Superman and Batman with a horror theme? And so that led to Superman and Batman versus Vampires and Werewolves. So we did that. And then we did Batman versus the Undead. And he edited me directly on Oracle the Cure, which was supposed to get Barbara Gordon her legs back. And we wrote the whole thing, drew the whole thing, and then I got a call saying, Paul Levitz won't let us do it. Can you rewrite the last couple of pages so that she doesn't end up not being paralyzed? And without us having to redraw them. And so I did. And then a few years later, they did it anyway. But did that, and I did Red Tornado Family and Lobo in Weird Worlds with them.
Wow.
And, which was cool. Got to work with Gerry Ordway on that. And Red Tornado was with a young guy named Jose Luis, who's gone on to just be this incredible superstar, young talent. That I love his work. I loved it then. And you could just tell then that, while he was still learning, he was incredibly gifted. And Tom Mandrake was who I worked with on the Batman, Superman stuff. So great run doing all that stuff. And then over the years, have gone down the road of doing a half a dozen other projects that for one reason or another never ended up happening because of either marketing changes or whatever. We were going to do a couple of annuals. I was going to do a Batman annual and a detective annual that crossed over. And then they decided they were doing some company-wide crossover, and they needed the space in the annuals to do that. And so that went away. But yeah, I don't know. I don't know anything about where Dan's going to land or what he's going to do or anything. But he's a very smart guy, very talented guy. I think he'll be fine.
Fantastic. I'm kind of floored by just because I was doing my research on you, and it's just like, holy shit, you've done all. I was late to the game because I had a kid when I was 18, so I was afraid to jump ship and go into comics. So I took a regular job at a magazine and to pay the bills. And you took off as a teenager.
I got married at 17.
So I was 18. I was 17 3 days before.
Yeah, I was.
So my wedding anniversary was right next to my birthday.
I was 17 for another 3 weeks. So
we did the same thing.
Yeah. So my wife was 16. I was 17. And sadly, we lost our first child, which was a little girl.
Oh,
about a year later.
Yeah, I'm sorry to hear that, bro.
But we had twins 5 years later. So who are 31.
You
made up for it. Yeah, that's amazing.
Yeah, I've got twins.
Yeah,
and I'm a twin.
Yeah,
so,
that's unusual. Usually, everybody always wants to talk about it skipping a generation.
I think he's faking it. I don't think his brother's his twin at all. I think they just met. But yeah, because I had a kid within a month and a half of our marriage, my son was born, and the pressure was on me to be this bread earner, and I was terrified. And I got a personal letter from Dan Didio years ago, complimenting my work. But at that time, as you know, you worked in New York. You had to work there in the offices if you wanted to be an artist. There was none of this freelance shit like we have today.
My career was always freelance, so it's other than when I was on staff. So I drew for the first 10 years of my career. I drew from Kentucky and Indiana and Michigan. So.
Yeah, when I talked to them, they said we're only accepting staff. you have to be established to be freelance. And I'm like, well, nobody knows who the hell I am. And so, but I was fine with it. But you're kicking ass from day one. That's amazing.
Well, I had a good run. A few good runs over the years. I will say this: I did always have better luck being on staff and then doing freelance for that same company.
Well, it's experience that I think that a lot of artists today don't get, that working on staff.
Well, I guess what I'm trying to say, though, is I wasn't drawing for those people. I was art director or production manager. So I was in another role at that company. And it's worked with me with my film career, too, with visual effects. It's like, I know we haven't talked about this yet, but today I write and direct and produce and do visual effects for movies and television. And one of the things that is a recurring theme is, especially on a smaller film or a mid-range film, I would say, is I'm there to produce visual effects or supervise visual effects being shot. But at a certain point, it's, hey, you're a director. Would you mind just kind of handling this bit? Can you cover shooting this or supervise shooting this?
So you're kind of doing a second unit thing.
Either directing officially second unit or just, or unofficially. But yeah, so Hellraiser 6 was that. I went up there and the comment the producer came over to me and said was, we're on day 5 and we're 9 days behind. Okay.
That's terrifying.
All right.
So what you're saying is, I just joined a ship that's already
underwater.
Sunk.
But so they had me direct second unit on that. So because I was already going to be there supervising effects anyway. And,
what did you think about working with or on the film The 13th Warrior, which, despite its box office, I was a big fan of that film.
Oh, it's a hugely loved film.
Yeah, I love it.
I never bothered to look at what its box office is. I know that my understanding is it wasn't huge. And now, to be honest with you, I only realized that because I saw like a Looper episode or something on YouTube that pointed at it. Because
you watch them too, huh?
Well, they talk about me sometimes in a nice way. But back in the day, I don't remember it being considered a bomb or anything. I just remember it came out. It was kind of a mid-range fantasy action adventure film. I loved it. What happened was I had left New York, came to San Diego, built a studio doing design and comic book coloring and lettering and that sort of thing, packaging, toy packaging design, trading cards. And if you ever saw Bloodshot 1, the original, it had a chromium cover. It was just a unique cover, shiny foil looking thing. And it was the first of its kind. And that process was done in San Diego. So I ended up working with the company that developed that, patented it, and I created, me and my team created a lot of trading cards in particular that used that process. So we did stuff for Skybox and Fleer and Upper Deck and Tops.
Nice.
And so we were one of the only companies that knew how to prepare these files so they would print right. And so did that, and I made the jump to move up to LA and start doing visual effects with the hope. That was the goal. And I became friends with a guy named David Stipes, who was the supervisor for visual effects on Deep Space Nine, had won an Emmy for Next Generation, for the final episode of Next Generation, where the Enterprise goes vertical and goes through the other ship and all that stuff. And he took us around and took me and my buddy around and introduced us to folks. And I ended up storyboarding for Disney Effects, a short-lived company called Disney Effects, DFX, that was primarily doing pilots and specialty projects. They weren't Buena Vista Visual Effects. They weren't DreamQuest or any of the other divisions or the Secret Lab or any of the other bigger divisions of Disney that did stuff. They were this sort of little small group. And I started storyboarding, and very quickly I storyboarded a half a dozen pilots over the course of a month or two. And then I got a call saying, would you be willing to do an emergency session on a few days to a week on this film called Eaters of the Dead? And ended up taking the call, and Disney was always funny because depending on who you spoke to, they were either super cool or they were trying to get you to work for a penny. And and I one of the pilots I was on, I got this call while I'm with the director, and the guy is saying, it's like, this is Disney, this is a big time kid, and it was like straight out of the movie. It's like, so I need you to do anything the guy wants for like $500. Can you make that happen? It's like, nope, can't do it. And he's like, well, what do you mean? I was like, I do this for a living. I'm a professional. I'm established. I can say no. And he was like, well, no, this is Disney. It's like, and I've worked for Sony and Marvel and DC and Dark Horse. And
that's that typical thing that you see in the arts where it's like, yeah, but working for us will get you exposure.
Exactly. And but the director was in the room with me, took the phone from me and said, hey, I'm going to tell him to charge you triple. So just go to hell. I'm at the phone. So I did. And anyway, I ended up being asked if I would do Eaters of the Dead, but they wanted a lot of scenes working directly with Michael Crichton in 3 days. And so
that's great. You got to work with Michael Crichton. That is awesome.
Wow.
That's somebody that I always wanted to meet.
And I spoke to him on the phone and we exchanged emails. I never did get to meet him, but I did meet Ned Dowd, who was his producer. And and Crichton was fantastic because it was a series of notes that were basically boiling down to, because what happened was Michael Crichton had written and produced the film, but John McTiernan had directed it and turned in the film where he didn't shoot a lot of the stuff that was in the script. And a lot of scenes were just not in there, or they were in there in a very odd way. So Crichton was brought in to fix it. And so it was... I've
heard a lot of problems with McTiernan in that way.
Well, that's the only one I really know. And this isn't long before he had trouble and ended up going away for a little while. But but it was this weird thing of like, okay, the movie's kind of made, but it's missing these major scenes. And so Crichton sent me a list of these are things we want to have happen. And these are specifics. And a lot of it was just like, Ibn goes into the longhouse and sees horrifying things. Go with this. And then he steps back out. So when you watch the movie and we see Ibn, which is Antonio Banderas' character, go inside the longhouse while the Northmen are all outside.
And all those dead bodies inside.
In the original, we didn't go inside. He stepped in. We stayed with the Norsemen for a minute, and then he came out and vomited. That's how McTiernan intended it. And so all that stuff where you see all the dead bodies and you see like they see an arm underneath a fur hanging off of a table and they reach over and pull the arm and the arm is detached and there's pieces of people and all that stuff. And then the bearmen attack. That was all stuff my buddy Charles and I came up with over those 3 days.
That's fantastic. It was actually one of my favorite moments.
Thanks. No, I'm very, 3 or 4 of the big scenes were us. I will say that I'd also storyboarded the Vindel mother attacking Bolvi, where she sticks him with the pin and poisons him, the king. They did a much better job than what we came up with. But the ending, they had a fight, but they never had a specific enemy. And so that was an interesting thing too, because I got a call from the producer saying, you've made a character out of one of these guys, and he's wearing the necklace showing his mother's symbol, the fertility goddess. And would you be willing to design that as a piece? And we're going to actually craft that as a real prop and a piece of the costume. And we did that. And so it was a very cool experience. And that was like right off the bat. So like anything else, I don't know about your experience in life, but it's sometimes when you do those things very early on in a career, you think like, well, that's how it's always going to be. This is cool. And it's not. So it was a really great experience. It happened very early. And I also put it in perspective that when we came in as visual effects guys, and we worked on My Favorite Martian and then did Hercules and Xena and a handful of other things in the first year.
See, there's another crossover because I also worked for Josh Becker. He was a regular writer-director on Xena as well as the Hercules movies.
Very cool.
And he's also one of my oldest and best friends.
Oh, yeah.
Bruce Campbell introduced me to him.
I was going to say, Josh is one of the Detroit guys.
Yeah.
He's one of Sam and
in fact, I'm doing right now the movie poster DVD Blu-ray cover for the re-release of Running Time with Bruce.
Yeah.
And it's a Josh film. because that was my first movie gig, was the official artist for that movie.
Oh, that's very cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, there were a couple of the guys, and I forgive me, I blur them in my mind. There were a couple of the additional friends of Sam and Rob's. And,
it's the Detroit Mafia.
Yeah, but
you got Rob Tapert, you've got Bruce Campbell, you have the Ramey brothers, and then Josh, and Scott Spiegel,
right? Okay, yeah.
And there's one more guy, and I forget his name.
Yeah, Scott's who I think I was also thinking of. But and then I've met, and I'm drawing a blank on his name, but an artist that designed the Book of the Dead, actually did the
yeah, that's the guy I'm not remembering the name of.
Yeah, I always say it's Tom Sutton.
Also the composer, I forgot his name, the guy who did all the Evil Dead music.
No, it's very
Joe LaDuca.
Yeah.
Just popped into my head.
Yeah, I always have to stop and
welcome to your fucking 50s.
I have to stop and think if it's DeLuca or LaDuca, but yes, that's it. But cool. It's always interesting because, like I say, you think that if you have a great experience early on in your career, that's how that industry is, and it's not always the case.
No, it's never consistent with anything.
Had a great time with those guys. Had a great time, and I don't think I've ever had a really bad experience in film and TV other than a director on one project who was just kind of insane. Do
you want to tell us some more about that one, or do you have to be careful?
No, it just boiled down to, I'm running a team of artists from California. I'm in California, they're in Louisiana, and because it was a tax credit situation, so we put people there to do this job and properly go through the channels to do the tax credits and all that stuff. And this director would tell the team that they were doing a great job, love the work, and then he'd get on the phone and want to scream at me about how horrible it was. And I finally just said, it's like, okay, here's the deal. Out of doing literally thousands of hours of television and film, this is the only time I've ever experienced it. So I have to stop and think, what's the unusual common denominator here? And it's like, you're the variable. And when he understood what I was saying, he was like, well, what are you saying? I'm like, well, I'm saying that you weren't involved in any of those other projects that went so well. And so but let's walk through it. And when I finally pushed him, his criticisms literally boiled down to, I don't think this particular effect looks very real between frame 55 and 58 and between 71 and 76. It's like, okay, it's a 500 frame shot. If you've got an issue with those few little 1/24ths of a second, we'll fix them, but that's nothing to scream about. So it's, I ended up meeting the producer, who was Frank Mancuso Jr. And when I explained, this is how this has been going down, he turned to the director and said, is that pretty much it? And he said, yeah. And he said, okay, from now on, you shut up. Turned to the director, like didn't want to hear anything from him anymore. But because they were running in, apparently I wasn't the only one that was dealing with this kind of ridiculousness with it. So. But like I say, for the most part, people have been wonderful.
Now, on Bloodshot, during the production of that, did you have a lot of involvement with it?
I wouldn't say a lot. I had an advanced look at the script. I was invited on set for a week of shooting and got to spend time with Vin Diesel and Asa Gonzalez and Sam Hugan and Mike Morris and the team. And Dave and his wife were there, the director and his wife. And had a little bit of input when shooting, just because they were shooting some second unit stuff and I was there, but I wasn't really actively directing anything. It was just more like, you might want to think about, that kind of thing. But because I'm looking at things like matching angles and sunlight and stuff like that. But I did give some input to an early cut of the film and to the first cut of the trailer. And I'm sure I wasn't alone in these notes, but they addressed every single thing I said, ended up being reflected later.
Good. I like it when the film production respects the creator.
Yeah, well, and a lot of that's because Dinesh Shamdasani, who's a producer on the film, was the publisher of Valiant, or the editor-in-chief. I don't remember exactly what the titles were, but he was the guy who he and a partner had bought the rights out of bankruptcy from Acclaim, and started publishing years ago. And then there was a split where he was pushed out of the company about 2 years ago. But he was still actively a producer, and Sony and Original Films gave him a lot of responsibility. So he was really actively the producer in South Africa when I was there.
Wow. Hey, Keith, you got any questions on this? It seems like I've been dominating the questions.
Oh no, I've been really enjoying all of this. Now, you said South Africa is where they filmed it, right?
Mm-hmm. Cape Town.
Cape Town. Wow. Okay.
Yeah. 24 hours of flying from LA. So
Yeah.
12 to Paris, 12 to Cape Town from there, and then came back through Amsterdam.
Yeah, at least you got to go to Amsterdam.
I got to go to the Amsterdam airport. Literally, my flight.
Oh, you didn't go. You didn't stop. Okay.
No, I would love to. My family's from there in the 1640s. They left in 1649.
Yeah, you've got quite the Scandinavian name there.
Well, Dutch, but yeah, it's specifically. But yeah, it was definitely someplace I'd love to go spend time. But I can only tell you what it looks like to go to one particular section of Schiphol Airport.
So now, have they invited you to any of the premieres, or?
I'm going to the premiere this Tuesday.
Cool.
The Hollywood premiere, the LA premiere. And then I'm going to be at a screening on Wednesday in Seattle, as long as coronavirus allows that to happen.
Yeah. Now, Keith and I have been talking a lot on our show regularly about the state of the industry.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
What are your general thoughts on that?
You're referring to comics?
Yes, the comic industry. I'm sorry.
I'm not that active anymore enough to really be able to say much about it. Just being candid, I don't really follow much in comics anymore. I tend to buy artist editions from IDW and things like that are reprinting things that are either artistically or nostalgically important to me. So things like Daredevil Born Again or Rocketeer or something like that. So I really can't tell you much about my opinion about the current industry. I know that as time goes by, and it's just the nature of not dying, is that I recognize fewer and fewer names when I pick up a comic book or look at a list of convention games.
Yeah, it's like when my daughter would come home with like new music CDs. Yeah. I'm like, I don't know who the hell it is.
Yeah, exactly. Sorry. No, it's so I don't know. I know that I will say that when I would have conversations with DC, with Dan DiDio or Pat McCallum or the different people, Pat was their sort of editor-in-chief or executive editor, that I would always get the feedback of, we really need guys like you because you know how to tell a story, and you don't take 12 issues to try to tell a story that can be told in 2, and that kind of stuff. And I was getting a lot of comments about, oh, it's so refreshing because you actually do things like name the characters in the first few pages of a story or in a scene. And whereas apparently, I guess, a lot of those things that to me just are part of the craft have kind of fallen by the wayside. And to me, there are fundamental rules about storytelling, whether it's a movie or a television show or a comic book or a novel. And that is, somebody is picking up this form of entertainment maybe for the first time or very early. And if you're picking up a comic book, you might not really try to read a comic till you're in your teens or a young adult. And, other than just flipping through something when you're a kid. And if you get confused after the first 3 or 4 pages and you don't know who this book is about or what it's about or where it's going at all, you're not likely to do it again.
This is actually something that Keith and I talk a lot about on the show, is our frustration with a lot of the modern writers that don't know how to tell stories. They don't understand character arcs or how to build characters. Structure is just not even there anymore.
Well, it's a shame, and I'm sure there are very talented people doing stuff. I mean, I'm not egotistical or arrogant enough to think there aren't, but I do know that that it seems to be when I pick up something and I'm hooked quickly, it's more and more rare. And I mean, there was some great stuff, and I'm drawing a blank on who wrote it, but who wrote the Winter Soldier stuff with Captain America 10 or 12 years ago? That was where Winter Soldier was established. But that writer, Steve Epting, drew it. I just can't think who the writer was. But that stuff I thought was really well done, really well crafted, and that kind of thing. And it was interesting even at DC to have editors tell me, just make the comment, because it's odd when they're making positive comments about things you're doing, that it's like, well, you're just like saying that I didn't dribble out of my mouth when I was drinking a glass of water. It's like, that's a basic thing. I should have that down by now. It's I shouldn't have to be complimented for doing things that are just basic storytelling techniques. So.
Yep.
But it was nice that they would. So.
Yeah, my favorite thing in when I'm working is when they're not saying anything to me.
Yeah.
It's like when I'm hearing from people, something's not going right. It's been my experience. So when they leave me the hell alone, they're happy with me.
Well, by and large, I feel the same way. It's just I hate that. I'm somebody who I don't know if you remember the term glasnost from the 80s, but which was trust but verify. That came up with Gorbachev and Reagan. That I'm big on that. So when I don't hear anything at all, I will reach out and say, just making sure everything's looking good, that sort of thing. Because every now and then I've encountered, oh, you know what, Kev, I've been so busy I haven't had a chance to read it yet. And I'm like, and I'm down the road on like issue 2 or something. And I don't like that either. So I'd rather. Exactly.
I'm actually running into something like that right now with that poster I'm working on, where I have not heard from the executive producer in 3 weeks. And it's like, look, man, I know you were busy in LA, but I'm going to give you 2 or 3 more days and I'm calling you.
Yeah, we did effects on an indie film, action film, and could not get the director or the producers to make comments. And we're like, we were very structured. It was, you'll get a batch of effects every Friday, and we'd love to have comments on Monday. And, because your deadline's tight. We're turning this whole thing around in 8 weeks or whatever it was. And, we're 5-6 weeks into it and not hearing anything. And I finally said, just throwing this out there, we won't be able to send you any more shots until we get confirmation of which ones of these are approved. And here's my cell phone number. Call me anytime. 5 minutes later, I got a phone call, and it was like, it's like, hey, I didn't realize nobody was getting back to you. Maybe I can come out to your shop.
Right hand doesn't know what the left hand's doing half the time in any of the industries I work in.
And so I got the producer to come and the director to come and sit beside me, and we just went through every shot. Because at this point, we're 120 visual effects shots done, and just no feedback.
And what I like about that is it's not passive aggressive. You're being very direct.
Yeah.
And I like that.
Well, there's no point in passive aggressive with that stuff. I mean, it's just like, it's here's where we are. We don't want to waste time. We don't want to waste your time or ours. I would love nothing better than to hear that the reason you haven't gotten back to us is because you just loved everything.
You just loved everything.
I just had a hard time buying. That's what happened. So. And they did love 90% of it, 80% of it. The rest were just little things we didn't know. We were supposed to be matching shots that they did live action that they'd never shown us. So we're creating something. It was an effect of a SWAT police station that has been gone into lockdown, and so all the windows are supposed to be covered up.
Oh, you're talking about the SWAT movie you worked on?
Yeah, SWAT Under Siege.
Under Siege, yeah.
And so
yes, I've watched it, and I actually liked it.
I was very proud of it.
I like a good action film.
Yeah, it was fun, and it was one of those things though that what we didn't know was that they had shot some small handful of windows that were in lockdown, and we needed to match that with all the other windows that we were doing digitally. So we had created our own look for what that shielding looked like. I was like, oh, it's got to match that. So okay, we'll redo it. So. But once we had that information, and we're off to the races.
Given how popular comics now have become to the entertainment industry, specifically to films, what do you think it is about Valiant that has allowed it to kind of jump out ahead? I mean, there are other companies, Boom Studios and Unipress and Dark Horse and Aspen. What is it about Valiant that has allowed it to, have this kind of success, and especially with Bloodshot now getting ready to release, and what seems to be probably future projects coming down the pike?
Well, I think the biggest thing is the fact that something I mentioned earlier, we had a continuity. We had a universe that was cohesive. And even the newer version of Valiant has done a pretty good job of trying to maintain that sense of all these characters are playing in the same world and interacting. And all the companies you just mentioned, to my knowledge, don't do that. They create other types of entertainment. They create anthologies, and they create solo adventure characters or fantasy characters or what have you that aren't part of the shared universe. And so something like Bloodshot, it was always one of the most readily accessible books that we did. It was a straightforward action adventure title with a science fiction overlay to it that, to me, had a strong theme about loyalty, friendship, bonds, that sort of thing, betrayal being an aspect of it. You create a comic book, and if you're lucky, it sells huge numbers. And if you're luckier still, it continues to do well. And Bloodshot was one of those titles that did that. Because we also sold, we sold close to 1 million copies of Bloodshot 1 in '92. Huge. I mean, enormous by anybody's standards. And no matter how many of those were kept in boxes and sold to dentists and doctors for speculation purposes, we still sold nearly 1 million copies. And I've signed thousands upon thousands. And so I know that they're out there. And but we sold 1.7 million copies of Turok. Also a beautiful book. Bart Sears, Randy Elliott, just a great, great thing. David Michelini writing. But that book, Turok, never had legs. It just progressively each month kind of went down until where it was one of our lesser selling titles. And for whatever reason that was, Bloodshot always stayed towards the top of our pack. So there was
an interesting story idea.
I think so. I mean, I think the idea of a Native American who stumbles into a lost valley and finds, bionically enhanced dinosaurs was kind of cool.
Yeah, I liked it too. I read both.
But it was just, but for whatever reason, it didn't keep its legs. And it was always interesting to me because I wrote Solar, Man of the Atom, The Eternal Warrior, and Bloodshot all 3 monthly. And I put just as much work and heart and passion and love into all of them, into each of them. And yet Bloodshot always outsold the others. And it was always interesting to me. Solar had a very strong fan base. Eternal Warrior had a good fan base. But Bloodshot was the one that was that. As far as this kicking off a cinematic universe, DMG, which owns Valiant, has sold off the intellectual property rights as far as licensed for movies to Paramount, to the rest of the universe.
Wow.
So if it were to, that's my understanding. So I'm not actively working with the company. I'm helping promote, we have a friendly relationship, but I don't do anything with them these days. If that's the case, as I understand it, you'd end up in the same situation that Marvel was in with, the MCU and Sony or whatnot, having Spider-Man, the X-Men and that sort of thing, or Fox, where it's like, okay, they're under different umbrellas. How do we team them up if we want to get Bloodshot in the Harbinger Wars movie or whatever? And it can happen. I mean, it's people have seen that there is a logic to that. But I do think that you can't underestimate the value of somebody like a Kevin Feige at Marvel, spearheading that consistency of quality and storytelling, and making very good choices with hiring directors and writers and so forth.
Yeah,
make his films.
We talk about it a lot. It's like somebody like Lucasfilms needed somebody mentally like Feige to pull it together, and they just, Kathleen Kennedy just couldn't do it. It didn't gel, but God, Feige just nailed it.
Yeah, no, it's and I'm somebody that, as a filmmaker, I know how difficult it is to even make a film that's just finished, not much less a good film. And just doing any kind of a movie from start to finish it's a humongous task, and even on a low budget or a big budget. And so I'm a pretty forgiving audience member because of that. And so I actually enjoy all the Star Wars movies, but I enjoy some of them a lot more than others. And it's just one of those things that with the Marvel stuff, to be perfectly candid, outside of like the Thor movies, which are hot and cold for me, like I thought Ragnarok was really a fun ride.
Yeah, it was.
I love all of the Marvel stuff. I think that I just walk out of there with like.
Well, I always refer to DC as the gateway drug to real comics. And don't get me wrong, I'm always going to be a Batman fan.
All right.
And cinematically, I'm a Superman fan. But I transitioned from DC Comics the minute Frank Miller took over doing Daredevil. And then that's all I wanted to read was Marvel, because he was my favorite writer over at Marvel.
Yeah, no, I mean, and I know I mentioned the FF, but I mean, that was because that was first, really. But a couple of years.
I think Fantastic Four was your first too, wasn't it, Keith?
Yeah, FF was my first stuff, but a couple of years later, it was. I was all about Gene Day's Master of Kung Fu and Frank Miller's Daredevil, and Miller was a huge influence on me. And,
ditto, artistically and writing.
Yeah. Well, storytelling wise for me and writing, not necessarily how he drew specifically, but his story.
I use a lot of black when I don't do the cross hatching and stuff like that. Later, Mike Mignola, I liked his work too, but I like working in darks. In fact, the book I'm working on right now, if you look at it, somebody wanted to color it, and I'm like, no, really. I like the inks that much that I'd just rather leave it black and white.
Well, yeah, it's. I mean, my early stuff was very, again, Gene Day, Paul Galassi, Al Williamson. So it was a lot of shadow and a lot of chiaroscuro kind of stuff. And so yeah, I've used a lot of Higgins Black Magic in my time. So it's,
good stuff, man.
Well,
Who like for me? Al Williamson was the single most influential artist on me. Who was the single most influential artist for you?
Al Williamson. So, yeah, that's and if you were to look at, I don't know if you've seen.
That's really weird. We both have the same guy.
Yeah, I don't know if you've. Well, I actually was hired to be his assistant in 1984. I moved to Pennsylvania.
Really?
To assist Al, and I got there the week Star Wars was canceled, and he couldn't hire me.
Tom Waltz, the greatest thing he ever said to me in a review about my work on one of the books that we did together was I was the Al Williamson for today.
Oh, that's high praise.
And I'm like, fuck you, dude. You're just really stroking my dick too much. No, it's bullshit. But thanks.
Al was my hero, and he was my friend. I didn't stay in contact with him as much as I would have liked to. But when I mentioned earlier, I think I mentioned that I did Highlights for Children magazine. I did that because Highlights editorial office was 2 blocks from Al's house. So when my young wife and I found out, so after we'd lost the baby, we moved to Pennsylvania. I was drawing for Pacific. We got there with the idea, well, Pacific owes me like $800 or something, and rent was $150 a month, so we were going to be fine. And I found out the same week that Pacific went bankrupt and wasn't going to be paying me that. And Al Williamson's Star Wars strip had been canceled, and he couldn't use me as an assistant, so we were kind of stranded. And
I was an avid reader of his strip.
I was too. I actually subscribed to the Los Angeles Times.
As a true fan, do you remember in his comic strip the name of Luke Skywalker's dad?
No, I don't. No,
it was Tan Skywalker.
Oh, okay.
And that was in the Al Williamson comic strip.
Yeah, which would have been Archie Goodwin's writing.
Yep.
Archie and I became friends, and he was very kind to me.
He's a very good writer.
He's brilliant. He never gave me work. He was the editor of Epic, among other things, and one of the Warren guys. But during the Valiant heyday, when Bloodshot was popular, and we were literally, I was writing books that were selling 300,000 or 400,000 copies a month. And I was also writing the Flash Gordon Sunday comic strip at the same time.
Really?
Yeah. I was sitting in a hotel bar during Chicago Comic-Con, and I don't drink, but everybody around me did, and everybody's just talking comics and whatnot. And I feel this hand on my shoulder, and I look up. He's got his hand around me, and it's Archie Goodwin, who was leaning in, and he said, "I mean, get it straight." He said, "I always knew you'd make it, and your name's everywhere." And it was just very touching. But he had what he was referring to is right then. Like that month, I was on that week, I was on the page 1 of Comics Buyer's Guide, and I was in David Anthony Kraft's Comics Interview, and there was Comic Scene had done an article on Bloodshot, and Heroes Illustrated had done something. So it was literally, that little window where I was getting a lot of press, and he was very kind, but he never gave me work. But I thought a lot of Archie, and of course, he and Al were longtime friends and collaborators, like going back to the mid-'60s.
And I'm trying to remember the artist that worked with Al with the comics. Was that Carlos Garzon, wasn't it?
Carlos Garzon was his assistant normally, and Ed King was his letterer. Al's first wife had lettered, but she passed away in the mid to late 70s. But Ed's still around. He's a Facebook friend of mine. I've lost track of Carlos. Around 1990, I was approached to draw a Roger Rabbit comic book where I would draw all the realistic stuff, and Carlos would draw the
humor. See, I love stuff like that.
And he was going to do all the Bigfoot stuff for the cartoons and then ink everything, because I drew kind of like Al. And so he already was in that school of how to ink that way. And he could, with him, he had that wonderful gift of being able to switch it and do, humorous, cartoony stuff, which I couldn't do.
That's just amazing.
But yeah, Ralph Reese, Dan Green, Carlos, they all helped out on Blade Runner, the adaptation.
Now, just so you know, I'm the founder of the Blade Runner fan club.
Oh, are you really?
Bladezone.com, the #1 Blade Runner site in the world. And it's really weird because, I'll go to a convention and then, one out of 100 people go, "I know you. You're the guy that runs Blade Zone." I'm like, I don't run it anymore. Someone else does, but I created it. Yeah.
No, that's I have 3 films that I consider my favorites, and I just kind of alternate. But it's Blade Runner, Raiders of the Lost Ark, and Citizen Kane.
My #1 film, Blade Runner.
Yeah.
#2 film, The Thing.
Yeah.
#3. Oh, actually, the first 5 are Ridley Scott, John Carpenter, Ridley Scott.
What are the other 2 John Carpenters?
It's Big Trouble in Little China. Mm-hmm. And that's all 3 of those. Escape from New York. That's the 3. And then the last one is The Duelists by Ridley Scott. Mm-hmm. And then Empire Strikes Back, Raiders, and shit like that come after it. But those 5 just absolutely had a huge impact on me as a young man.
No, well, good stuff. Yeah, I'm a huge Blade Runner fan, and at one point I was debating on, just for me, doing a couple of finished comic strips a la Secret Agent Corrigan style illustrations, adapting 2049, but just because I wanted to, not because I have a client that's willing to pay me money to do it. And that's kind of. I tried
to do the same thing because I had my in with IDW, and we tried to get with Alcon Entertainment. 2 of the people from IDW with me, and we couldn't get a seat at the table to talk to them.
Interesting.
It frustrated me.
Yeah.
Because all of us were big Blade Runner fans. And at the time, the guy was the senior manager at IDW for Hasbro.
Right.
Couldn't get a seat at the table with Alcon.
It's an odd group. I mean, I've met peoples in Fancher, and other people around it.
I've talked to all of them too. I've interviewed all of them except for Harrison Ford, which I won't do.
Okay.
He's scary. I'm terrified of that guy.
But yeah, I'm a huge fan of that stuff. So, I don't know if I'm trying to think if I left out any aspect of things. So, most recently, I've been writing and developing a pilot for a new TV series called Savant.
Because that was going to be my next question: is what's next?
I've been working on that. I'm producing and doing visual effects for a couple of indie films, one called Beyond Paranormal. And been working with that film's director, a guy named Matteo Robato. And been doing a lot of visual effects stuff. And as I say, I spent a good portion of the winter developing this pilot and series Bible. So that's something I'm excited about, which is something that's going out to places like Amazon and Hulu and Netflix and all that kind of stuff, trying to get a showrunner attached.
Outstanding, dude.
Yeah.
Yeah, because I'm working on something and I'm not allowed to talk publicly about it, NDAs. And it's like somebody involved with the Flash TV series, and I can't say the name, is interested in show running a comic book turned into a TV show. And the producer executive has asked me to step in and do all the I designed all the stuff for the thing. And he's been calling and leaving messages for me. And I'm just like, oh, I've been so sick. I don't really feel like dealing with this right now. But so are you not wanting to be the showrunner of your own project?
I do, but for one of the things that we're dealing with is because I have such a diverse career, is there's a tendency that I found of people being confused by who and what I am. And so right now we're taking the tack of I'm a writer, and then
that's the problem. If you wear too many hats, people do get confused. They try to, because I know this has been your experience, because it's been my experience too as an artist. Everybody wants to pigeonhole you professionally. Mm-hmm. They want to they stereotype you. And yeah, I can see you running into that roadblock. And how do you parse it for them?
Well, I usually try to get a read on the room and the people and present it in that light. You know, it's difficult dealing with someplace like Netflix when they want to talk to me about visual effects and producing and supervising visual effects, because somebody in the room inevitably wants to say, but I understand you also write and direct. I mean, what is it you really want to do? And it's like, and they have a hard time understanding.
I want to have a nice income. So whatever you want me to do.
I do all of these things. I enjoy them all. Sure, if you were to say, if you could only write, or you could direct, or you could do visual effects on this TV series or movie, which would you want to do? I would pick writing or directing more than likely. But I enjoy all of them, and I do all of them to the best of my ability. You know, I don't take on a visual effects job with the idea that they're going to let me direct it or produce it or anything like that. It often happens that because I'm there and I have those skills, that they'll ask me to help. But that's not why I do it.
Well, I'm going to wrap us up here because we've been over an hour, and I think it was a really good interview with you, man.
Good. I hope
I'm interested to get to know you better, too, outside of the interview, because you're a fascinating guy, man.
Oh, well, thank you.
That's what I was saying.
Oh, well, thank you, guys. I appreciate it.
And of course, we have that mutual connection with Mikey Sutton, who is the bomb diggity-o. I love that guy. I really do. Anyway, Kevin, thanks for joining us for this. And, hey, thanks for popping our cherry. Nah.
Well, good talking to you guys. All right, and have a great weekend. If I don't talk to you before then, and send me a link and I'll share it.
All right,
sure.
Thanks a lot, man.
Congratulations, Kevin.
Thank you, sir. I appreciate it. You guys take care. Talk to you soon.
Hey guys, thanks for watching Pop Culture Minefield. If you've enjoyed the show, please remember to like and subscribe, and don't forget to hit the bell icon. Remember, you can find us at Pop Culture Minefield on both Facebook and Instagram. Thank you again.
Y'all come back now, you hear?